I'm the director of the European Studies Center at the University of Pittsburgh and Jean Monnet EU Center of Excellence. And I'm welcoming you to our conversation on Europe focused on European enlargement. We're looking at 20 years on the process as it impacted and was experienced within a number of regions. This month, we're focused on Slovenia, and I'm happy to be joined by two expert colleagues. And I just want to signpost that next month, we will be focused on Hungary on February 29th. And then on March 28th, we'll be engaging Malta and Cyprus, bringing the conversations to an end. These are all recorded and available online. Many of you are probably looking at this right now as a recording online, but it is live and it's a webinar. And so those of you who are joining us, I just want to indicate that you are please encouraged to put questions in the Q&A. We will be reminding you that this is an open discussion and that your engagement is always welcome. And whether you pose a question directly, or I'll try to work it in the conversation. But this is in effect an open conversation, and I'm looking forward to engaging our two panelists here, and I'd like to introduce them both at this moment. Simona Kukovič is from the School of Advanced Social Studies in Nova Gorica. She's an associate professor of political science, Jean Monnet professor, and also affiliated with and teaching at the University of Ljubljana. Dr. Kukovič's areas of expertise is political and administrative leadership at the local level. She conducts research in the areas of leadership, comparative regional and local government, local democracy and participation, public administration, and has been participating in a number of very important EU sponsored networks, including a Costa network, as a member of the executive board of the Central European Political Science Association, and editor and scholar that we should all be enjoying. And I wanted to, I'll introduce Miro in a moment, but Simona, maybe to give you just a few moments to talk with us about your own personal experiences of the process of independence for Slovenia and EU enlargement, and if you have any sort of reflections out of your own personal experience.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. So yes, I have some, also some personal experiences in all these processes. I was born in previous big common country that was not democratic, and my first memories are actually from the period that Slovenia started to become independent. So, this transition, so how to actually Slovenia split from the big country and how to build own, state building and everything. That was very, interesting for me. And that is also the cause why I later decided to study political science. And at the time that I decided what actually to do in my life, Slovenia just became a member of the European Union. So my undergraduate studies were very much focused on the new regime, so the new big family of European Union, and all the reforms and everything that were going on at the time. So it was a unique experience, and I'm very glad that I decided to study this. And now I have the opportunity actually to speak about this and also to teach the next generations so about the history.
And to help us understand those processes that unfolded and continue to unfold, Slovenia's place within them and the larger process of the EU at this moment. Let me introduce our second panelist then, Miro Haček from the University of Ljubljana. Miro Haček is professor in the Department of Political Science in the Faculty of Social Science there. He teaches courses that are Introduction to Political Administration, Local Regional Government. He's been the head of the Political Science Department and head of Policy Analysis and Public Administration in the Department of the Faculty of Social Sciences in the University of Ljubljana. Has been in leadership positions within the Slovenian Political Science Association, including being General Secretary and President. He has served as Vice President for the Central European Political Studies Association and is now currently President of that association. Miro, thank you. Thank you for taking the time and joining us. And I'm wondering if you could likewise describe to us a little bit of your own personal experience of the transition.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, and also hello from my side. I'm far younger than Simona, so I don't remember anything. I'm just kidding. So I was also born in former Yugoslavia, few years before Simona. I will not disclose how many, but I remember well about certain things, of course, from former regime. And I remember that I was born in Maribor and we lived in Maribor. So this is very close to the Austrian border. It's the second largest Slovenian city. And I remember our trips to across the border to buy coffee, which is unimaginable today, of course. I remember trips to the local store to buy milk, and milk was not available in cartridges, you know. It was available only in the plastic containers, which is also unimaginable today. But I also remember when Slovenia declared independence in 1991. I remember the short war for independence.
The 10 Days War. Oh.
Yes, I was 17 then. So in Slovenia, you have to decide your field of studies at the university when you are 18. So this was just 1 year before. I was young enough not to be enlisted into the army, but the whole process of gaining independence influenced quite heavily on my decision not to study history, which I was thinking before, but to go and study political science. I was not thinking that I will be full professor one day, the youngest full professor ever, actually at my department still today.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But it was not the decision I regretted any time later. And also, I, of course, remember all the events after that, because I was already the undergraduate and then later graduate student of political science at my university. My PhD topic, for instance, was focused on the civil service reform in Slovenia, which was one of the reforms that was required to be the member of the European Union. So this was one of the conditions that the European Union demanded from Slovenia. And my PhD analyzed this huge reform that Slovenia is having still problems 20 years later. But maybe enough for the introduction.
That's fascinating, and there's so many things that are already addressed there. And Miro, if I can stick with you for a second, you weren't. I'm wondering about the choice both of you made for political science, and if in the field at that time, Yugoslavia was very different from the rest of the communist bloc. It had always had a certain kind of openness. The borders were penetrable in ways that say East Germany wasn't, a place that I was familiar with. And friends would go to Yugoslavia, and I thought, oh, how lovely, and the description was easy life. I'm wondering, though, the transition and the emergence of political science in its contemporary form, away from a kind of Marxist-Leninist approach, if that was then something that was just easy, or if the kinds of parameters with which political science operates in contemporary had to also be acquired during that time.
Yeah. So let me start at the beginning. There is only one department that is focused on political science in Slovenia, and this was always like this already in former Yugoslavia. So only University of Ljubljana has complete bachelor, master, and PhD studies in political science in the country. So we have no competition, basically.
Okay.
Or here or there, some small competitions like Simona's. But it was already like that in the former regime, in former Yugoslavia, but it was all, of course, politically controlled program, heavily influenced by the Communist Party, and it was also Communist Party maintained control over the program, so over the contents, what can be lectured, what cannot be lectured. Some professors were removed in 1970s and 80s because they were too liberal, or maybe they were seen as too liberal. So it was quite, let's say, not really democratic program. But after Slovenia gained independence, all this changed. The program went to transformation. A lot of new young people were employed there. Also, the school changed. It was just the high school. So the one level below the university level in Slovenia, in former Yugoslavia. So it was not really university study or bachelor study back in former Yugoslavia. But after 1991, political science became modernized, so to say. It became it was transformed to be offered on the bachelor level. So as the university study in Slovenia, we say this is the 7th grade of education. We have our scale from 0 to 10, and university study is 7th grade, MA study is 8th grade, and PhD is the 10th grade. And after 1991, faculty transformed itself, not to be under influence of some political party anymore, to become the modern faculty. And when I enrolled in, what was it, in 1994, it was already transformed to be, as it is today, Faculty of Social Sciences, where political science is still the biggest department, both in terms of personnel and in terms of the number of students.
So, Simona, I'm not sure if you want to jump in here, but I would ask this then related question, because, Miro, what you described is that the first project that you worked on was part of the accession packages and the accession negotiations. So I was going to ask what was the impact of accession and the negotiations on the Slovenian Republic. Clearly, it had impact on you. Simona, you already indicated that this was something that you were studying. Miro did give away his age by letting us know when he was supposed to be going to, we can calculate in our heads how old he is, but in any case, the question is then about political science playing probably then a very practical role in providing information, data, and analysis to make the accession negotiations move smoothly. And I'm wondering if you could, if we could explore that for a moment, because I would step back and say the interesting thing, of course, about Slovenia is that there was the 10-day war. The breakup from Yugoslavia proceeded not without some trauma, but fairly quickly. Independence. It's from the outside, it's a story of success, smooth transformation and transition, and as opposed to some of the other countries that we've been exploring this year. And so I'm kind of wondering what made that possible, and was it the political scientists being able to provide this kind of information into the process and guide that? Or yeah, I'd be interested in hearing your reflections on the impact of accession negotiations, both on you personally, but also on this, the way that it transpired so successfully. Either of you. Simona. Yeah.
So if I start, well, yeah, Slovenia was once the most northern part of the former federal socialist Yugoslavia, and actually then become the first time in history independent, exactly in 1991. So as you mentioned, the path into the independence was quite smooth, was mostly because of 4 advantages that Slovenia had even before. So that was because it was actually the only republic in a former Yugoslavia with very high level of national homogeneity. Then its economy was very well developed already in Yugoslavia. So actually Slovenia was the most, high income, and also according to the GDP, the most developed country. And then it had good links to both to the Western and to the Eastern markets, and with very, let's say, favorable geopolitical location, inside the Europe. It is in the center, actually, in the heart of the Europe, in the center, and it had open borders despite being socialist country. So these 4 advantages were, were very helpful towards gaining this smooth, independence process. Also, so after this short 10 days conflict with Yugoslav army, Slovenia was actually recognized by the international community very soon, already in January 1992. And a few months later, in the middle of 1992, was already formally accepted as a member of the United Nations. So all this actually helped that Slovenia became, really, let's say, model child of the Europe, these things. So our politicians and decision makers can started working on the state building and so on, so not to deal with the problems and the conflicts and the wars that other former states had to deal with it. So from my personal perspective, so how this actually influenced on my studies and everything. Well, of course, it was much more, everything was much more focused on, the advantages and the positive sides that European Union will bring us, and also the homework assignments. So the seminar works and everything were, about this new process and how Slovenia is now in comparative perspective and so on. And yes, of course, also, when preparing my, diploma thesis and then master thesis, and also my PhD thesis, it was somehow, focused on, before and after, succession. So everything was compared. So how it was in the previous state and in previous regime, and how it's now. So actually, we were, let's say, influenced by these processes quite heavily, I would say, but also this was a part of our education that prepared us very much to live in new system and to understand this new huge big family, and what role we have now in the European Union.
So the accession process opens up various packages and looks at various aspects of institutional order, freedom of the press, and transparency, et cetera, et cetera. I'm wondering then again, and Miro, maybe this to you, is the smoothness of the transition, did it mean that there wasn't much to do with the accession packages, or did it mean that the accession packages actually helped create a direction for the Slovenian Republic at that point in time?
I think that the accession process was quite helpful for the Slovenia. It was also quite a long process, actually. It lasted at least from 1996 to 2002. So for 6 years, and during this period, Slovenia had to adopt a lot of legislation that it did not have before because of the There was no statehood tradition before. Never. Slovenia was independent for the first time ever in 1991, so it was not the same position as with some other Eastern European countries. And Slovenia also had to go through several reforms that were not easy. There was a lot of opposition towards those reforms, not because of the European Union, but because of the stakeholders that were just against the reforms, because their current or at the time positions were threatened, like reform of the civil service system, reform of the pay grade system in the civil service that was very, very difficult, the most difficult of all reforms that Slovenia had to implement. There was a local government reform, there was a media legislation reform, and so on. And Slovenia was doing quite well during this time because the government was quite stable. It was led by the liberal democracy of the time. So basically not left and not right-wing party, but liberal in the middle of the political field party, led by Janez Drnovšek, who was also a very special person, let's say, not easily influenced by certain interest groups or stakeholders, either from either side of the political spectrum. So he was quite steady and very focused on the EU accession process. And after the EU accession process was finished, he resigned basically in 2002 and became the president of the Republic, so removed himself from the government. So during this process, Slovenia was doing well. Implementation of the reforms was quite successful, I would say. The problem is, of course, what happened later. When Slovenia was already the member of the European Union, then we backtracked some of those reforms. Some of those reforms were destroyed, basically, by the same political actors in the National Assembly. So it was, at least among political scientists, maybe not general population, but among political scientists, there was an impression that we basically faked some of those reforms just to get into the European Union. Then we changed some important elements in those reforms, like the civil service system. Of course, we were focused on building the career focus system. Immediately after we got into the European Union, less than a year later, we just backtracked and destroyed the whole system and changed the direction for 180 degrees, basically.
I mean, it is interesting, I think, in this dynamic of accession, one of the things that we repeatedly recognize is that it is a moment in which there's a possibility of pressure, and then once you're a member, that's removed, and then the training wheels are off, as we would say in English, and you get to choose the direction, which is certainly an interesting aspect of the process. Simona, did you want to add anything to those observations? No. So I'm intrigued by the idea that as a new republic, and as a republic that was already fairly, the borders, Simona, as you described, the borders were open. It was actually an economy that was fairly strong. I know from my own area of research that design from Ljubljana, that was a particular in terms of the art world in particular, has this amazing reputation from that period as well, continues to, so a certain kind of industrial presence, whereas other states that were going through the accession process also had to deal with the modernization of largely an agrarian population, which created other kinds of displacements. Poland in particular was hard hit by that. But so is that also thinking about the entry into the Eurozone, which happened also rather quickly? Was there a sense that the ease with which the Eurozone entry took place, was it because indeed there was not necessarily a commitment to an old form of currency? The banking system was all new, and so the process here was already a process of harmonization with European institutions from the start. Would either of you have any thoughts on that? Simona, maybe?
Well, yeah, so after joining the European Union in 2004 with 9 other countries, so Slovenia was really like a role model, you know, and of course this was also in terms of getting the new or the adoption of the new common currency, euro. And Slovenia introduced the euro on 1st of January 2007, which is quite quickly after our joinment. And actually, it was the first new member state to join the Eurozone. So first member state from the 2004 enlargement, then that joined the Eurozone. And back then, the transition of from Slovenian previous currency, so Slovenian tolar with T, so was very swift and smooth. And that is because the population had been informed, I would say, very well in advance about the new currency. And also the people had a very positive attitude towards its introduction and mostly anticipated very positive effects. So at the end of, it was 6 months later, so at the end of June 2007, we actually also removed this dual display of prices, which was also very quick. So we since then we are actually using euro, and this is something that was very somehow easy to introduce in Slovenia, and it was maybe I would say it was very similar also to the other events that happened in this period. So also it was the same with the entry in the Schengen area and so on. So this, I would say, this period was really the golden age of the Republic of Slovenia.
Miro, yes, please. And let me just actually say to those people who are participating in the webinar that, again, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and I'll bring them into the conversation and open it up. Yeah.
So maybe I add something to that. This was also the period of very stable political situation in Slovenia. From 2004 to 2008, we had, for the first time in our history, the right wing or right center government led by Janez Janša for the first time. This is something that we don't have in the last 10 or 15 years of great political stability or high levels of political stability. And one of the goals of this government was to preside over the European Union and also to introduce euro and to enter Schengen. So they had 3 very clear goals during this period. And if you know Janez Janša and his policies, he's maybe not too democratic, but he's very efficient. And he was very efficient during his first rule, and he managed to be quite successful in all 3 goals. And the focus of the government, the most focus on the government, was the introduction of euro, and the idea was to display both currencies for the first year. So everybody could calculate basically who is cheating and who is not cheating, who is using the transition to euro to basically raise the prices. This is why the prices were not really inflated a little bit maybe in the first month, but it was not impacting the inflation a lot. And what could we later observe in other countries of the region.
So I appreciate that you introduced the question of the Schengen zone, because again, as Simona just observed, that also happened quickly. There's still countries in the region. Romania just joined the Schengen zone, and the Western Balkans. There's all sorts of questions about the status there. So it also indicates the ability to fulfill a certain security package vis-a-vis the borders. But these things, I'm wondering, now we're pointing to some destabilization or a shift in the government. So from the liberal initial government to some dynamics that one might describe as driven by crises, if you will. And I think we can observe that 2007 is followed by 2008 and the beginning of the Great Recession. That many countries in the region with the Schengen zone experienced then labor migration outwards that destabilizes the economy in certain ways. The promise is that tourism will bolster the economy because with free travel it's possible, but we've seen a flight of youth in other countries to work in other places where more lucrative jobs are available. Could you help me understand the relationship between the kinds of economic transitions, the Janša's transformations, as it were, and the way that, in effect, indeed, Slovenia started to flirt with populism and far-right, more anti-democratic paradigms, the sort of illiberal democracy paradigms that we see elsewhere. Would either of you have some thoughts on that?
Maybe I should begin with this. Slovenia was hit with the global economic crisis quite hard from 2009 to basically 2014. So it was a long and also very deep crisis. And in 2009, GDP of Slovenia was minus almost 8%, which is one of the biggest drops anywhere, basically, in Europe. So, but this was also the time when the political power shifted away from Janez Janša, that was seen as efficient during his term, but also not very democratic person. And this dissatisfaction with his, not efficiency, but with his political style or with his political methods brought in the new left-wing coalition that was composed of three parties. But it was not very efficient, and it was led by Social Democrats and Borut Pahor, who was later also the president of the republic, but he was not the best for the role of the prime minister, let's say this nicely. So he was not very efficient as the prime minister, and this coalition had problems to addressing economical issues that were at hand, especially the issues that you mentioned. So the loss of the markets, and as Slovenia was and still is heavily export-oriented country, the crisis in other parts of the Europe also multiplied probably in Slovenia. So when there is a saying in Slovenia, when Germany has the cold, Slovenia has the pneumonia. So it's much worse. It's much worse in Slovenia, as 30+% of exports goes to Germany. And when Germany was in trouble, also Slovenia was in much bigger trouble. And the government was very slow to address those issues, or did not address them, basically, ignored them mostly. And it was already 2011. And after 2 years of ignoring the issues tend to grow bigger, not to disappear. And this resulted in the fall of the government and the political crisis that went on, and it's still going on today, I would argue. So populism was introduced probably as the result of inability of political elites to address the issues at hand, to introduce proper policies, to intervene at the right moment. But there, maybe this was the easy answer, was the populism. So it started back then. It did not start exclusively by the right-wing politics in Slovenia. In Slovenia is a special case probably because in Slovenia populism is rightly distributed between left-wing and the right-wing parties. So we see a lot of populism coming from the extreme left, which is the Levica. We have the Levica party, similar to the Linke in Germany. So extreme left party that is basically arguing that we should reintroduce socialism in Slovenia. And we see the same level of populism also from the far right parties or right parties. like Slovenian Democratic Party of Janez Janša, and parties that are even more to the left, that are anti-immigrant, that are anti-Balkan parties, and new political innovations. We have conspiracy theorist parties now in Slovenia that are also quite successful and could get into the parliament at the next elections. But we can probably discuss about this a little bit later.
Happily, but what you're also describing is that Slovenia is exactly a member and participating in European processes broadly, and some of what you're describing, I would say, is also not just similar to the United States, but is also being generated out of forces in the United States. I think that level of communication is interesting for us to think about. Simona, did you want to add anything to Miro's observations here?
Well, actually, I agree. So the global economic crisis, and especially the lack of proper political response, resulted so not only in the financial issues, but also in serious political crisis. So we had 3 consecutive political, let's say, crises, and also early parliamentary elections. And this caused, of course, a lot of instability on the political arena. In Slovenia is, right now known about the, let's say, new phenomenon. So the infant political parties. These are actually, I would say, populist political parties that emerged, just a few days actually prior to the national elections. And most of them were quite successful. Some of them even won the elections. And for example, in 2014, so the new political party was established only 41 days prior to election day. And they surprisingly won with 36%, which is, huge win. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And of course, this, I call them instant governments, proved to be very inefficient and also incompetent. They don't have political capital. They don't know how to deal with, especially with not only the leadership, but also, the concrete and specific issues. Many of these new so-called new faces, so the populist leaders, actually failed to deliver up to the promises they gave during the campaign. And main problems were also lack of any major reforms that we needed heavily during these crisis times. And the problem is that there are consecutive crises. So the global economic crisis, then we had a migrant crisis, and after migrant crisis was health crisis, so the COVID pandemic, and all the time was political crisis. So now we are in the wicked circle. So and this spiral goes down, because we need to cut somehow, all this happening, what is going on.
Extricate ourselves from that spiral. I wonder, so the period of, in effect, from 2011 onwards, from outside Eastern Europe, Slovenia, a number of other countries in the region, seemed to be part of a re-democratization wave that in the protest that was parallel to what was happening in North Africa and the Middle East. And there seemed, or in Ukraine, and there seemed to be a kind of insistence on democracy. But then what you're describing to me is that the willingness of people to go out on the streets combined or confronted an inability to translate that into political efficiency is, I think, the word that Miro is repeatedly using. And could you help me understand that a little bit more? Are we to understand that commitment to democracy eviscerated into sort of illiberalism and populism by virtue of the various crises, or would you say there's still at heart this understanding that the pride in the Slovenian Republic's success?
I would say that the commitment towards democracy is, of course, still there in Slovenia, but the way that the process of polarization, political polarization, is advancing in Slovenia, it's getting, like here in the United States, it's getting far worse. During 2010s, so from 2011 to 2018, we could see many cases of cooperation between both sides, so between the government and the opposition at the time. There were policy issues that were a result of the cooperation of both sides. There were some constitutional changes that were adopted with 60 votes. We need 2/3 majority for those, and this was the result of cooperation. But after 2018, when the Slovenian Democratic Party won the elections, but was not able to form the government because the 5 small left-wing parties formed the government instead. After that time, we could observe deterioration in this regard. So there was far less cooperation, if any, maybe zero cooperation between both sides, a lot of political polarization, and the voters are always searching for somebody that would magically appear and offer easy solutions in terms of populism, in terms of voters are searching for somebody that is not politician really to save us all. There are certain candidates that do not have any political experiences that are popping up, getting support, also from the media and from the civil society. But problem is that those politicians do not have any experiences, they do not have any human resources behind them, they have no idea how political system works, and what can you expect that will happen if you elect somebody to be the president of the government who had basically no political experiences from in his previous career. It cannot be well, right? So
we had 4 years of that in the United States, and
you might get 4 more, I think.
4 more.
Yeah.
But it is interesting also what Simona was describing of these infant parties, that it's often the case when this happens that there's suddenly seats available and you have to scramble to find people to fill them who weren't not necessarily prepared at all to be in a governing role, because it comes as a surprise, as has happened in Germany recently with the AfD, for instance. And so the dissatisfaction with the performance contributes to a dissatisfaction with the performance of government in general. I'm wondering if we're getting some questions that I want to bring in. Erica, do you want to pose that question directly? I have another question from Pavel.
Sure. So if I'm correct, the last round of elections in Slovenia had pretty high turnout at around 70% or so, which is higher than I think Slovenia had been hovering in the 50% range prior to that. Do you think it's that political polarization that you've been talking about that contributed to that? And do you think that, is that a blip, a temporary blip up, which, we would see that as a good thing, the increased turnout? Or do you think that there was something special about that particular election that led to such high turnout?
Okay, I think yeah, you are correct. The turnout in 2022 was 71%, which is the highest in decades, basically, since the Slovenia gained independence, and it was 20% higher than in 2018. So 20% higher turnout that compares to the last elections is a good thing, right? But in this case, it was not the good thing, because the turnout was the result mostly of the COVID pandemic and of the people being fed up with the government. I would argue that any government would have difficulties in this regard, and the government was introducing basically anti-COVID measures that were very similar to other countries. but the level of dissatisfaction of the population, the media was very, very critical towards the government. The government also made quite few errors, like buying masks at outrageous prices and so on, of course. All these together contributed towards a high levels of public dissatisfaction with the government and their motivation to go to the voting posts and to change something. So the result was the win of the yet another infant party called Freedom Movement in Slovenia, freedom from the COVID. And this freedom movement managed to get the highest result in Slovenian history. Nobody yet ever got 41 MPs in the National Assembly. We have 90 MPs, so 90 MPs, and they have 41. So almost they could form the government on their own. They needed just one coalition partner, basically, to form the government. And the result today is that we have very strong coalition with one very strong political party, but this party was again formed just 3 months prior to the elections. And basically, even I, as a political scientist with 25 years of experience, do not know 5 of their MPs. I never heard of them, more than 5 probably, yet alone a common citizen. So there are political unknowns, basically, people that never speak in the parliament. They get their speeches on the paper, they read them, or they usually fail to read them because they don't know how to read even. But there are political unknowns, and without any experiences, so politics is being made somewhere else, not in this ruling party. There are people behind the party that basically established the party, people that were not standing to be elected. So we have so-called, in Slovenia, we talk about people from behind the scenes, or uncles in the shadow. So there are people that are sponsoring those parties, and the result is basically a lot of inefficiency in the government. As MPs are political unknowns, also the ministers are mostly political unknowns, and they have no idea what to do mostly. Even after 2 years being in the government, they still haven't learned how the government is supposed to function. And the result is that even though the coalition has 55 votes in the parliament, so very strong majority, we are not seeing any reforms that are critically needed. For instance, now we are talking for the last year, about the health system reform. We still have the public health in Slovenia, or maybe I should say we had public health system in Slovenia. So when you are paying taxes, you get all the health services for free in Slovenia. But this system is now crumbling down for the last year or two, and the government fails to address those issues, for instance, just to make you an example. And thanks for the question, of course.
And again, I would say that this is a sign of precisely being European, because many of these processes are processes that we see in other countries. I'm wondering, Pavel Levitsky, who was our associate director here at the University of Pittsburgh, and for a while has a question that directs us to think about beyond the borders of Slovenia and the possibility of sub-regional organization. I think this is an interesting way to think about Slovenia's role in the EU, because as he's observing, there hasn't been in the region a creation of partnerships, or has there been a creation of partnerships in the region that might parallel the way the Visegrad states had been functioning to create a bloc, literally a bloc, within the processes of the EU. Various, especially Ukraine, the war in Ukraine has split the Visegrad up, but the fact that, or Slovenia does seem to be a player of its own in the region and not working with sub-regional partners? Or could you address that? Is that part of the legacy of both the Yugoslavian history and also the Habsburg history that we're independent now, or is that a mistake in describing in that description?
Okay, thank you for the question. Thank you also to Pavel Levitsky for this question. We all know that there was, maybe then not easy anymore, but there was a strong cooperation between the Central European countries of Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Hungary, called the Visegrad Coalition. And this coalition basically, not officially, but it became less intensive with the Ukraine war, where those countries had different stance towards the Russia and towards the war. And there is a similar coalition or the strategy also in the Adriatic region called the Adriatic Ionian Initiative. And this coalition is not so strong, it's not so well known, but it's aimed towards working together on the issues that are common to all Mediterranean countries, all the countries that have its borders to the Mediterranean Sea. And Slovenia has some 42 kilometers. This would be 30 miles, a lot. 30 miles of the seaside on the Adriatic, and it's part of this in this initiative. In fact, it is right now presiding over this initiative, and there are some common issues and problems that are facing all those countries. For instance, migrant crisis. Migrants are trying to get across the Mediterranean Sea from the northern African countries to Italy, Spain, maybe Greece, and some other countries. So this is one of the issues that those countries can work together to find better solutions, or at least to form uniform stands in front of the EU, because also EU has some ideas how to address those issues. But this initiative is not so strong because the political cultures are different in this area. Northern Africa, Spain and Portugal, Italy and Greece and so on, and not to mention Eastern Mediterranean with Israel and its neighbors. So political cultures are different, so the coalition is not so strong here. Also the historical paths are different, political systems are different, and we have less common things that that Visegrad countries have in common, but still there are common issues, and this initiative is very well and alive, but I would argue it will never get so strong as compared to Visegrad countries.
Simona, do you want to add anything to that?
Maybe just regarding the support of Ukraine.
That was going to be my follow-up question.
Slovenia
is what the impact
always
that is.
supported Ukraine from the beginning. And if you remember, so during the second presidency over the Council of the EU, Slovenian Prime Minister, so Dan Janša, was actually first that visited President Zelensky with two other prime ministers from Poland and Czech Republic, and actually they went to, let's say, give the support to the President Zelensky, and they were the three, so the main political actors of other countries that visited, the country that was already in the war. And, this gesture was resounding in the world of media, and also, the world media reported in a very positive way. And also after the change of the government in Slovenia, there is still support, but maybe not so firm that it was, during the previous government. But still, I see Slovenia that is, a country that it's very in favor of, to help Ukraine and also to support the Eastern Partnership of the European Union.
Mm. And so that's indeed can we, how do I want to phrase this? The Ukraine, the migrant crisis, has Slovenia been a country that has brought in or has supported settlement of refugees, either from the 2015 wave, or is there a Ukrainian presence in Slovenia?
Should I answer this one?
Sure.
In 2015, there was some preparedness to host the migrants in Slovenia, but there was no preparedness from the migrants to stay in Slovenia. So their only goal was to cross Slovenia as quickly as possible, go to Austria, Germany, Sweden, I don't know where. So we had, I don't know, 600,000 migrants crossing Slovenia in 2 months.
That's true.
Yeah, and less than 1,000 basically decided to stay in Slovenia, and I think less than 100 are today are still there. So almost nobody stayed in Slovenia.
Because during that period, Serbia became a kind of transit country, opening up its borders and allowing people to move through and on, and that would have meant that they would have indeed been crossing through. That was part of the reason for the question. They would
Ukraine
have been
is a little bit
Slovenia.
different. We are hosting around, I think, 8,000 Ukrainian citizens in Slovenia. We were open to more, but only 8,000 decided to move to Slovenia. And their levels of integration are very much different compared to the levels of integration of people from Northern Africa or Asia or some other areas. Those people came in 2021, 2022, and today they are speaking fluently Slovenian, for instance. They have learned the language in a year or so. Of course, it was much easier because we all speak Slavic languages, but still their motivation to be integrated, to maybe stay in Slovenia forever, is very much different compared to other migrants, and the level of the acceptance from the general population is also different in this case, because you will have people that are speaking your language, that are looking similar to you, that have similar interests, and general population is quite acceptable towards those migrants from Ukraine, but not so much from the migrants from other areas. We had some problems with them because Slovenia is still the transit route. One of the routes to the European Union is going from Serbia to Bosnia to Croatia to Slovenia, and then towards Italy and Austria. And now we should have Schengen borders in Slovenia, but Austria decided years ago to basically suspend the Schengen border temporarily, they say. But this is going on for years now. And also last year in 2023, Italy decided to temporarily suspend the Schengen border. So we have again police controls on the borders with Italy and Slovenia, officially because of the terrorist threat, but unofficially because of the migrants, of course. And as a result, Slovenia also basically canceled Schengen border towards Croatia. So now we are basically back into the history before Schengen, and we have 3 out of the 4 borders with police controls. So Schengen is temporarily suspended basically because of the inability of the European Union to at least efficiently deal with the migrant crisis.
Miro's word "efficient" is dominating our conversation here, and I need to visit you in Ljubljana and talk to you more extensively about efficiency. There's so many things, we're coming to the end, and there's so many things that I would love to explore with you: Euroscepticism, NATO membership, what in effect we're talking about in terms of a sense of security in the country and the commitment to. But I want to know, 2025, Ljubljana is to be a European capital of culture. And any thoughts on what that will be like?
Well, actually, Nova Gorica is going to be the capital of culture.
All right. So sorry, I stand corrected, but you'll be right in the center of it. Those things are often bringing in tourism, but not necessarily in a positive way. Sometimes is Nova Gorica excited about being?
Oh yeah, very much. And also we all are excited because this is a good, a good practice of cross-border cooperation, because Nova Gorica, which is at the border with Italy, and let me say Old Gorica. So this is, the town Gorizia in the Italy. So actually this candidacy was common. So it was joint
so the two
support, yeah. And actually now these two cities, one in Italy, one in Slovenia, will be, the capitals, of culture, of Europe, yeah.
Very good, very good. Well,
So
hopefully
it is another way how Slovenia is still very much good, connected with other neighboring countries. And for me personally, I'm very happy that actually this will happen.
What you just described is actually very exciting and a European project, and that's great. And so as you said, Simona, Slovenia is in the heart of Europe, and I'm grateful from my heart for the conversation with both of you. It was really interesting and fun. So thank you again.